Hey everyone. Okay, dyslexia. Let's talk about what gets misdiagnosed or misconceptions or even just myths surrounding reading disorders. So, number one thing that people need to be aware of is dyslexia is just one type of reading disorder. Often we assume that dyslexia is all encompassing. It means you have a difficult time reading, when in fact there are many reasons why someone might have a reading disorder. And today I want to talk about one of the factors that can contribute to difficulty with reading, writing, and so many other things that often just gets lumped into dyslexia. And in fact, if you know what dyslexia really is, can feel really frustrating whenever you hear that dyslexia is when kids reverse letters, write letters backwards, read backwards, all that type of stuff, when in fact, the definition of dyslexia is not at all that. So let's talk about what the definition of dyslexia is and when there could be something else going on besides dyslexia. So I want to preface this first by saying sometimes a kid has dyslexia and other things going on that I'm going to talk about. Sometimes a kid does not have dyslexia but has a reading disorder for other reasons. So the problem with not recognizing what's really going on and just using a kind of one size fits all approach is that these are the kids who ultimately slip through the cracks and do not get the help they need. And this leads to so much frustration for both parents and kids. And this can be years of this. I see it all the time in my clinic. So, first of all, let's talk about what dyslexia is not, because I feel like that's the best way to kind of debunk a lot of the myths. So, dyslexia is not letter reversals. It is not when a child experiences blurring, when the words move on the page, any of that type of stuff. It's not when they lose their place when reading. It's not when they have difficulty copying notes from the board. It's not anything to do with the visual system or visual processing, which comes as quite a shock for many people. Dyslexia is when there is a phonemic deficit, and that means that phonemes are like the smallest sound parcels in language. And when a child has dyslexia, they have a hard time distinguishing between those sound parcels. So I'm not talking phonics, I'm talking even smaller than that. So they might have a hard time distinguishing ba from da. So, and that can be in reading, writing, speaking, all that type of stuff and so forth. I'm not going to get in too much into dyslexia today because I actually want to talk about the other factor, which is visual processing issues, which often gets mistaken for dyslexia. So visual issues is not dyslexia. That's the bottom line. Any issues or visual disturbances can coincide with dyslexia, and other times kids do not have any issues with phonemic deficits, but they have visual processing issues. So kids, if they have difficulties with following with their finger, or sorry, they need to follow with their finger. If we're telling them things like, to use colored overlays, special glasses, larger print texts, we're going to give, an accommodation IEP on an IEP might be, we're going to give them notes instead of having them copy the notes from the board. Any of those types of things are indications that there are visual processing issues as opposed to dyslexia. So as you can see, doing things like phonics-based programs are not going to solve the problem. But unfortunately, kids so often, and I know that in Ontario and other, depending on the state or the province or part of the world that I'm working with clients, dyslexia is not always a term that's used. In Ontario, when I work with local clients, there's very rarely, I don't think I ever see a kid anymore with the diagnosis of dyslexia. It's not a term that's used. What's used is a language-based learning disability. And the problem with that is that too often there's a one-size-fits-all approach. The kid can't read. We're going to use Empower. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And the result is just a one-size-fits-all approach that really doesn't get to the root cause. It does not solve the problem. So if there is a visual processing disorder, this can mean one of two things. So first of all, it could be the way the eyes and the visual motor system are working. And this is not anything to do with 20/20 vision. It's these kids can pass a standard eye exam oftentimes. It does not have anything to do with that. They might have problems with 20/20 vision, but this is not something that you can just go to your regular eye doctor and they're going to be able to tell. This has to do with the musculature, with the visual motor system, with the eyes, or the visual cortex, which is on the right side of the brain, and how it processes visual stimuli. Sometimes the eyes are working just fine, and it's the way the visual cortex receives that visual stimuli and what it does with it. So the eyes see, the brain is not processing the way that we want it to. So kids with these difficulties have problems with visual memory, visual processing, just like losing their spot, which I mentioned, copying notes from the board, as I said, eye tracking, eye teaming. And what that's really going to impact in terms of like everyday life is not just reading and writing, but it's going to impact athletic skills. It's going to impact coordination, or it can, and it doesn't, depending on the severity. It can impact their art skills, their penmanship, their athletic skills, I think I mentioned. And the other thing is their focus, because for some of these kids, if their visual system is really off, the visual let's just put it this way, the world can feel really overwhelming for them on a visual level. And that is why teachers now are being told not to have too many visual distractions in the classroom. And the reason is that these kids are overwhelmed when there's too many posters and images on the wall and too much color. And it's just, it's these kids actually do better when the room is kind of just more zen, if you will. And that's great. That's a great accommodation. And I do better too when the room is more zen. I think a lot of us do. But by the same token, if we address the underlying reasons why these kids are so overwhelmed in a room where there's too much visual stimuli compared to kids who don't have that issue, then we don't have to make all of these accommodations and deal with the challenges that come with that when those accommodations are not there. So visual processing is basically, or visual processing disorder, if it's severe enough, is really a problem that is less well known. A lot of people just don't know how to what to truly do in order to address it, and I mean that with all the love. They're just not trained in it. So if a kid has letter reversals, they use all kinds of tricks, like, remember B is like this and D is like that, and they have all these tricks to help the child memorize things. But ultimately this leads to a lot of compensations, and it really slows them down. It really makes reading slow and laborious. It still ends up in that spot where it's taking them a long time to get through things, when if we retrain the visual motor system with exercises and cognitive exercises and visual training and so forth, then we can really move them past that. So the key, if you're wondering, okay, what do we have to do? We have to strengthen the visual motor system with different eye exercises, basically. We have to address primitive reflexes, because that's very much connected. We have to make sure the vestibular system is strong, and that's connected to the visual motor system. If the visual or proprioceptive system is off, that's going to affect how the eyes function on a visual motor level. And then we also want to work on addressing, is the visual cortex on the right side of the brain weak, and do we need to strengthen those connections? So those are different areas that we really need to look at if we want to help kids read better, read fluently, so they're not just staying stuck in the same spot. So the bottom line is that extra reading over and over and over again is not going to help these kids improve their weaknesses, if you will. I see the sun is like coming in there full tilt. All of a sudden it was raining. So that's not going to help improve their visual processing difficulty. So keep in mind, your child could have dyslexia and have visual processing issues. Your child may not have dyslexia and have visual processing issues. Your child might have visual processing disorder, or they might not have visual processing disorder. but they have visual processing issues where they just don't hit all the ticks on the box to get that diagnosis. And then you find out, or you're told, sorry, everything is fine. They just are weak. And I absolutely don't subscribe to that belief. When a kid is struggling, there is a reason. They might not meet all the criteria to get a diagnosis, but they're not just weak. There is a weakness. Okay, keyword, they are not just weak, there is a weakness that needs to be strengthened. So let me know, does your child have problems with letter reversals, losing their place when reading? Do they have issues with, copying notes from the board, coordination, getting overwhelmed by visual stimuli, poor art skills, poor athletic skills, any of those types of things? Let me know in the comments below what you're seeing. Has it improved? What have you done to help them overcome that? And also, I will be doing a training on Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern on the role of weak connections in reading disorders and how you can identify them, because ultimately when we can start identifying these weaknesses and these problem areas, then we can actually work on improving them. So let me know in the comments below what's up with your child in terms of their reading difficulties. Maybe it's not visual processing. Let me know what it is. This is what always helps me know how I can support you further in terms of information, trainings, videos, and so forth. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you have a great Monday.